Welcome to Healthy Chats with the Doc with Dr. Brooke Leverone. Today's topic is PMS. I think you talked about it, Doctor. We're 50% of the population, and of that 50%, 75% of women experience PMS.
That is correct. Yeah.
The good news is I'm so old, I kind of forgot about PMS. But I remember when I was younger, man, it made an impact. So, what is PMS? Can you kind of describe from a body standpoint what it is?
Yeah. PMS. I mean, basically, many of us experience PMS as a set of unwanted symptoms that occur prior to the onset of our menstrual cycle. So PMS stands for premenstrual syndrome. So it's a syndrome that occurs prior to menstruation occurring. And this can present in a lot of different ways, but a lot of women will complain of feeling more irritable, more emotional, more depressed. They'll also suffer symptoms of cramping and bloating and breast tenderness and maybe some fatigue. So it can vary, but these are the things that we commonly see women complain of. Again, that period of time before your period starts, which could be maybe just a couple days, but in some severe cases, it can be 10 to 14 days prior to your period starting as well.
What actually causes PMS? I mean, is there a physical something that causes it?
So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of variables and the research is still sort of being dialed in, but from what we can tell, it has to do with we know it's a fluctuation of hormones and it's changes in hormones. And essentially what it is an estrogen dominant picture where you have a relatively elevated estrogen stimulation and low progesterone. So we want estrogen and progesterone to be in a better balance with each other. But we know that if there's too much estrogen or the wrong types of estrogen, we can get too much estrogen stimulation. And if there's not enough progesterone to buffer that stimulation or buffer that level of estrogen, then we can also be in an excess estrogen state. So people can either have too much estrogen, the wrong types of estrogen, and or not enough progesterone to buffer that estrogen. And as a result, we get, estrogen is very stimulating. It's a stimulating, excessive hormone. And so if we have that running rampant and out of control, we're going to feel kind of out of control too. And it's going to create a lot of unwanted symptoms. So that's the basic physiology as we understand it, as best as we can understand it at this time in what's occurring. And then there's sort of like a lot of factors around that, meaning that stress is a huge, we all know, we've talked about stress, I feel like so much, especially in the last year, but stress is a big contributing factor to PMS. In part because stress will deplete progesterone levels. So then, you're losing that progesterone buffer. So that's a big part of it. Inflammation, we know, especially surrounding some of the physical symptoms. We know that inflammation in the body can contribute to these symptoms as well. And so, that means your diet is going to have a huge impact on it. And then certainly, your sleep's going to affect it, your hydration level. There's a lot of other factors surrounding that concept, but that's sort of the basic physiology as best as we can understand it to why we will see those changes and those symptoms in women.
So does that explain why, like, maybe you've never had PMS and you start getting perimenopausal, like maybe in your mid 40s, or you become menopausal in your late 40s, and all of a sudden you're starting to experience PMS, but you never had it when you were younger?
Yeah. So, there's unfortunately few women who don't experience PMS at some, like we said, about 75 to 80% of women experience some form of PMS. So those lucky women who've never had PMS often will experience changes in their perimenopause years. And women who have struggled with PMS will often feel an exacerbation of those symptoms in their perimenopause years. And again, it's because of changes in the hormones. So in perimenopause, we tend to be more estrogen dominant. It's like the ovaries are wringing out, or the body's wringing out those ovaries for every last drop of estrogen they can get because they know that things are starting to decline. So you're getting a lot of estrogen release into the system in those perimenopause years. So pushes you into these hormone imbalances. And so then you're going to be in that estrogen dominant state again, or even more aggressively so than you were in your previous years. So, and that's the hardest part. You know, my patients in their perimenopause, that's the hardest part, is things start to really get a little bit ramped up during that period of time, causing some of those unwanted symptoms. So very, very common for either PMS to start for the first time or PMS to get worse in those perimenopause years as the hormones are beginning to transition to that later stage of life.
Yeah, so just another good reason to have a good baselines when you're younger and you're, you know, late 20s, early 30s, right?
Know what we're working with so that we can continue to monitor and help support and balance to make that transition easier for sure.
So let's talk about, I mean, PMS obviously can be super uncomfortable and can affect our productivity as people and in our personal and professional lives, but what's the difference between PMS and PMDD? And is that serious?
Yeah, so PMDD is a more extreme version of PMS. And these particular patients tend to have a lot more emotional symptoms associated with it than the physical symptoms of the cramping, the breast tenderness, and the bloating. There's a lot more depression involved, more irritability involved. They tend to be the symptoms tend to be more exaggerated and lasting for longer periods of time. Typically, and so there's a couple of reasons for this, but typically this is associated with people who already have potentially an underlying anxiety or depressive picture that, you know, they've battled with on and off throughout their life, maybe some family history there, maybe they're already being managed by a therapist with those symptoms, and the change in hormones sort of triggers it and causes it to just, you know, be worse and sort of flare up during those times. And part of the mechanism of this is because we will see changes in our neurotransmitter levels around our hormones. So like our serotonin around our period, excuse me. So like our serotonin, which is really important for feeling good and sleeping and happy, you know, everything's fine, serotonin, right? A lot of our psychiatric medications are serotonin reuptake inhibitors, you know, boosting serotonin. So we see that there's drops in those hormones around our cycle, and that can be part of the mechanism that can contribute to some more of these extreme symptomology. So that's essentially, you know, that what happens in that premenstrual dysphoric disorder, right? That PMDD is just an exasperation or exaggeration of symptoms that are a little bit more on the extreme and more related to the mental emotional state in those days leading up to your cycle changes. And again, some of that has to do with pre-existing underlying conditions and changes in your neurotransmitter levels as the hormones fluctuate.
So it's not unusual to become a different person at that time of the month.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. The Dr. Jekyll, Mrs. Hyde picture.
Well, it's funny, you know, we have a lot of younger females that, you know, work at Levita. And so, you know, there are times when they actually start cycling together and it's like, whoa, right. Okay, we that heightened emotional.
Oh dear. Yeah. This week's a rough week in the office. Yeah.
Yeah. Lots of essential oils and those kinds of things.
Right. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, I mean, a lot of times you hear things like birth control or somebody may put somebody on SSRIs or something like that. Let's kind of break it down. So obviously there's natural ways to deal with it, but there's also a lot of times doctors will put people on birth control pills for PMS. Well, what is that about?
Yeah. Okay. So when we go to in traditional medicine, sort of the standard of care is to prescribe a birth control pill and or a psychiatric medication like an SSRI. And it's not that those don't work or can't work. And in some cases in severe PMDD, maybe that's what we need because we need a little bit of a stronger gun, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean those are your only options. And it's going to depend on, of course, the severity of your symptoms and the rest of your picture. So the birth control is because it's essentially suppressing your hormones and controlling everything so that, and commonly what they'll do is they'll have you skip the the placebo week, right? The sugar pills or the iron pills will have you skip it and just start the next pack right away. So you don't even get a period. So you're bypassing your cycle altogether. So you're bypassing all of that symptomology, right? So that's a common tool that they'll use that basically suppresses the hormones, locks everything down so that you're not getting these huge fluctuations that are contributing to the symptoms. And then again, the SSRIs or psychiatric medications that can be used to boost that serotonin. So as I was mentioning a moment ago, the decrease in serotonin before your cycle can be one of the contributing factors. Also can be why you crave chocolate, by the way. And so they'll prescribe medications to boost that serotonin level so that you are also not having changes in your neurotransmitters to stabilize your mood before your cycle. So those are tools. That is sort of the standard of care in traditional medicine. And in some cases, like I said, that might be necessary and that might actually work for that person's lifestyle choices. On the other side, if that's not something that you're comfortable with, or maybe your symptoms just aren't that bad, we can do a lot to adjust those hormones and those neurotransmitters naturally without having to necessarily go on a medication. And that means, healthy diet to reduce inflammation. That means regular exercise to increase circulation. That means staying hydrated. There are definitely some herbs that can be used to help naturally boost that progesterone, adrenal support so that that's not contributing to lower progesterone. We can do things if you have too much estrogen stimulation, there's things we can do through the liver and other specific supplements that can lower the estrogen so we get a better balance there. So there's lots of other options as well. And then, we can even use bioidentical progesterone and provide that to the patient. So instead of taking a birth control pill with synthetic hormones, we can do bioidentical progesterone, which is not going to work as a birth control. So if you're needing contraceptive, please note that's not going to replace that, but it can provide that progesterone boost so that you have some relief. And I can tell you, hundreds, if not thousands of women I've treated with this. And, when you shift that hormone balance and, even a little bit of progesterone on board, it's like, oh, that feels, yeah, that's way better. They'll be like, I didn't even know my period was coming. It just showed up. And it's like, how nice is that? So that reality does exist. Like it does exist that we can make, symptoms go away and you don't have to suffer every month. And, that's the biggest thing about why I do what I do is that so many of us, women out there, we suffer with these symptoms thinking that they're just normal. And this is, as women in this world, we just have to suck it up and deal with it. or take some medications we don't really want to in order to be able to function in the world, but it doesn't have to be that way. There's lots of other ways to approach the problem to feel better around your cycle. But yeah, the long answer of your short question was the birth control pills and the SSRIs are typically the standard of care in traditional medicine, and as the reasons I mentioned to why they are working and why they use them.
Yeah, I think it goes back to treating the symptoms or treating the root cause, right? So like you can chase the symptoms and treat the symptoms with certain things, or for those who want to get to why is this happening in the first place, we can find ourselves a functional medicine doctor and start looking at the root cause. And I guess what I hear you saying is that PMS is normal. But you don't have to suffer through it. What it means is it's signaling there's a hormonal imbalance happening.
Yes.
And during that time of the month, that's a time where you should be treating your hormonal imbalance, and everybody will be different. And as you become perimenopause and menopausal, it may actually get worse.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I had a question pop up on Instagram asking, are painful cramps not regular then? Which is a really good question because they're not. They're common and we normalize them in our modern culture, and they sell Midol and all these things to regulate them. But as you were just saying, painful cramps are a signal that something is wrong. A little bit of cramping, I would say, is probably normal. Some of us still have like a little, something's happening, because something's happening in your uterus, right? So there should be, like you get a muscle cramp after working out, or if you haven't stretched in enough time period, so a little bit of cramping is normal. But if you're doubled over in pain and you're having to take something, that is definitely a sign that something is not normal. This is an inflammatory process with an imbalance in prostaglandins and likely an estrogen dominant picture with too much estrogen stimulation and or not enough progesterone stimulation. And it's very easy that you don't have to live with that complaint. That's a very common thing that we can remedy when we balance some of those things out. And you can even start, reducing inflammation in your diet, regular exercise, increasing your water intake. Evening primrose oil, which is an essential oil that helps to shift those prostaglandins. That can be something you can start with and see if that, stress, I mean, I could go on and on. There's stress management is really important, adrenal support, but that's sort of the concept there when I see that heavy, those painful cramps, that's the pathway I start thinking about. And those are the things we start adjusting in our patients that makes a world of difference.
Yeah, so I think that, obviously, everyone's different, and as you mature through the phases of womanhood, you might not have anything happen in your late teens, 20s or 30s, but in the late 30s or early 40s, you may start having issues, and that's not unusual. But if you're in severe pain, that is a time that you should probably either seek out your OBGYN or your functional medicine doctor to say, hey, I think we should take a look at this because it's getting a little more serious.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. If you're in severe pain, you don't have to live that way. Please don't. There's lots that can be done. We know that caffeine can make it worse too. That's another one. Unfortunately, alcohol can make it worse, which is of course what we want. We want to grab that glass of wine in those moments, right? But that can also make it worse. But really staying well hydrated, self-care, stress management, regular exercise, working on digestive health, reducing inflammation. Those are all some basic things to just get things going and shift.
Oops, I think we've lost Dr. Leverone's connection, but now you're back. Okay, so you're back on Instagram, but not on YouTube. Now you're back.
Uh-oh.
There you go.
Okay.
You're there. Hello. Well, and it is, we are getting past time, but to wrap
we are
up,
at time. Yeah. I think I got all the pieces of information out, at least on Instagram. For those of you on YouTube, no caffeine, no alcohol, regular exercise, lots of water, stress management. And then we can build from there.
I know when you have cramps, you don't feel like exercising and you do want to drink, but it's probably not the best thing to do.
I know it's not, unfortunately. Yeah.
All right. So the answer is
and my computer's
happens. 75% of women experience it, but it is really a hormonal imbalance. And what you need to do is you need to treat the root cause, not the symptoms, and you don't need to suffer, right?
Exactly. As always.
Well, doctor, have a great time on the other coast. And it's 72 and sunny here, so survive that humidity.
Yeah. Yep, 92 and humid here. That's my hair right now.
Exactly. All right. Well, thanks again, and we'll see you next week.